Well, hello everybody. Welcome to unit or module number 5, which is around understanding people and their personalities. Welcome throughout Queensland, wherever you are. We've got people in local government from all over the state, and it's great to have you here. I just wanted to make sure that I'm coming across loud and clear. Could those of you who are online, could you just type in the question box there whether I'm coming across loud and clear? Obviously, if I get nothing coming back, it means that I'm not being loud and clear at all. So if you just type in there under the section on questions whether you can hear me or not, just one or two words would be great, so that I know that I'm not talking to myself, which is not a good start. Okay, sorry.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the module number 5, Understanding People and Their Personalities. Welcome all over Queensland, wherever you are. We've got a lot of people in local government from all over the state. I just want to check and make sure that I'm coming across loud and clear. That's always the first key thing. So if you could just look to the right-hand side there under the question box. Hi, Beck. Just indicate if you can hear me. That would be really helpful. So in other words, if I'm not getting anybody writing in there, it probably means I'm talking to myself, which isn't a good thing. All good, thank you. Great, excellent, thank you. Good, yep, all good, thank you. Okay, that's the only price you pay sometimes for running webinars, is you never know sometimes whether the internet connection is going to be good, but it looks like it might be working really well. Okay, guys, we're into number 5 now, and I sent you out the diagnostic to do in preparation for this. I don't know whether you've had a chance to do that. If you haven't done that, that's okay. You'll get a chance to do that at the completion of this particular webinar. But if you have, then you'll be able to follow through and have a look at your own results and get an indication of your own personality type. And I guess the objective of this is not only about knowing yourself very well, but it's also understanding the people you work with in local government and some of the stakeholders as well. So if you've got questions or comments, please type them in, because I'm more than happy to take them on board as we go through the webinar. So don't be shy. Type in your questions and I'll certainly address them as we go along. All right, so you can see coming up on your screen now, gone, there it is. We've got 6 modules, of course, in this series, and you guys, I guess, are pioneers because this is series 1 and it's been so popular. We'll be running several of these series, so thank you for being brave enough to jump on board for series 1. Seems to be working and we're getting some great feedback, which is always good. You'll notice that there are 6 modules and we're up to number 5, and I guess with one more to go, I just wanted to do a quick recap. So we started off several months ago with the ingredients of effective feedback. So I'm hoping, of course, that you're doing this, and the objective of that was to make sure that you try to give everybody, or as many people as possible, feedback every day. And I set you the homework to actually give 3 bits of feedback each day. So I hope you haven't dropped the ball on that. I hope you're doing that, because all of these things are supposed to be building on each other. In Module 2, we looked at our influencing capabilities, and you might recall the influencing profile. And there were 4 different types of influence. There was investigation, calculation, which are the 2 logical types. And then we have the collaboration and motivation types, which are more the emotional approaches to influencing. And the key point out of Module 2 was that we need to be using a variety of influencing strategies in order to influence those people we come in contact with. So I hope you've had a bit of fun with that and being able to observe how people like to influence. Obviously, it's also very useful to think about how you might influence upwards as well. How you might influence your manager or director or whoever you report to. And then in Module 3, we looked at optimising team performance, and really the essence of that module was around the need to be having regular dialogue with your team members in a one-on-one format. So it's about having good conversations with people and making sure that you keep them engaged in the process, and that's what Module 3 was about. Module 4, we looked at some ways and means of being able to motivate other people. It's always the perennial challenge for all of us who are in a leadership role is how do we get the best out of the people that we lead? And sometimes that's really hard. I understand that. And I've done a lot of work, of course, in local government, and I understand that sometimes it's really hard to do that. Bear in mind that one of the things that came out of that is that we can't actually motivate anybody. All we can do is create the environment by which people decide or don't decide to become motivated. But we can do certain things, and you might recall I talked about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And the argument is that if you're giving people freedom to make their own decisions wherever possible, some mastery, that is, some ability to build their skills and capabilities and sponsor that. And 3 was to let them understand the purpose of their work, so the why of work. If you can do those 3 things, then you're in a good position to be able to create the motivational environment for people to give of their best. And I won't preempt this, but next time we meet, of course, we'll talk about meetings. And today, of course, understanding people and their personalities, which is a fun way of looking at this whole area. So I asked you to go away and to use autonomy, mastery and purpose in your leadership decision conversations. And I hope you've had a chance to stick at that no matter what. And I hope you've had some wins. And I'm always open, of course, to your feedback. So do send me any emails. I'm more than interested to hear your success stories or otherwise. Okay, so what we're really on about in this session for this Lunch and Learn session or module is I want to be able to provide you with a fun and practical tool for understanding yourself and others. So fun as in I'm going to actually talk about some famous personalities as we go through this to give you some ideas and context around how people behave, their personalities and so forth. So that's what we're trying to do. So it'll help you connect better, hopefully, with other people. And there's always somebody that we have a personality clash with. It just seems to be the nature of being human. And one of the reasons that we often have a clash is that we often have a different style or different personality, and we kind of just don't get where the other person's coming from. So we are going to look at that today, and I'm sure as I go through some of these things you'll be able to think of people who fit these particular types of personality. So what are we covering today? Well, we're going to have a look at the whole concept of personality. We're going to actually look at the 4 different personality styles, and we're going to look at the traits of those personalities. So what do people do who have those personality types? Now, if you've completed your personality profile, you'd be aware that you didn't get a score, 40 points, or you didn't get a maximum number of points in one particular column. You would have had a spread of scores. And of course, we are a combination of all forms of personality, of course, but there's often a dominant dimension to our personality that will often be particularly prevalent when we're under pressure. When we're under pressure, what happens is our personality accentuates and we become more of who we are because we're trying to protect ourselves from the world. Personality comes from the Greek word persona, which basically means mask. And we all carry around this mask. And this mask is to protect us from the rest of the world. And the question, of course, is where does this mask come from? Is it hereditary? No, not necessarily. It doesn't mean that you inherited your parents' personality, and some of you might think, well, that's good. And it's likely that your children won't have inherited your personality either. So is it genetic? Is it something that's sort of in the genes? Or is it environmental? Is it something that's shaped by the experiences and the people that we come across in our journey through life? Well, the research is interesting on this. It seems to chop and change all the time. It used to be thought that personality was part of our upbringing. So however we would interact with the people around us, or the situations that we're in would shape and mould our personality. I think that's probably still true to a certain extent. But some research has suggested that it's a kind of people are born with a personality, that it's a genetic predisposition. And it's probably true. If you've got young children, you'd be aware that those young children have sort of got very clear personality traits from a very young age, and you sort of wonder where that comes from. So there's probably some truth to that. So I guess it does beg the question, is it possible to change your personality? Well, the latest research says yes. Neuroplasticity suggests that we can shape and change our brain depending on the experiences and the thoughts that we have. So it is theoretically quite possible to change personality, but it's highly unlikely because, bearing in mind, if you think that the personality is a mask to protect ourselves from the world, well, it's very unlikely that we will want to change that mask. We'll be quite set in how that mask has formed, and we will tend to, as I said before, revert to type when we're under pressure. So we'll become more of who we are. We'll look at some of the applications of dealing with these different personality groups, and we'll look at the platinum rule, which is distinct from the golden rule. Okay, so moving right along. So you'll probably, if you've looked at the personality profile, would be aware that I've used 4 animals. There are lots of these personality profiles out there. There's MBTI, there's TMS, and it goes on and on and on. So there's no shortage of personality profiles. I've decided to use animals because they are easy to understand. I mean, when you think of an owl, you've got a picture in your mind of what an owl does, what sort of behaviour they exhibit. So we've got owls, we've got bulls, we've got lambs, and we've got owls, bulls, lambs, and peacocks. And so when you complete the personality profile and you add all the scores up, you get a score which normally is predominant in one of these 4 columns. And what that suggests is that you have a predisposition towards that personality type. So it's likely that you'll exhibit the traits of that personality. And of course, the higher your score relative to the other scores, the more likely you are to exhibit that personality type. So, if you had 50% of your score in one of those columns, it's when you read the descriptors in the personality profile I sent you, you will probably have a smile on your face thinking to yourself, yep, I'm all of those things and more on the page. And of course, if you had an even score across all 4, then you might be saying to me, well, you know what? I'm a bit of a combination of all 4, and that's very true, no doubt, for all of us. So that's fine. So guys, let's have a look at those 4 personalities in a little bit more depth. So there you are. You can. It's gone now. It's on your screen. What you can see there is I'm going to build up a model so that you can actually see how these personalities work. So the first thing I want to do is up the top here, I'm going to put 2 words that I'm sure we've all heard of. And those words are introvert and extrovert. Now, there's a lot of rubbish that's written about this and a lot of myths about what introverts are like and what extroverts are like and so forth. Let me just simplify all this for you. If you really want to know what the whole purpose of what introversion and extroversion is all about, it's essentially about how we recharge our batteries. So people who are predominantly introvert will recharge and energize themselves by going within. So in other words, they'll keep to themselves. They might sort of lock themselves away or read a book or watch television. They don't really need to be disturbed. And what happens is once they're ready to go, they'll come out of their cave. The extroverts, on the other hand, recharge their batteries by talking things out. So they like to actually think aloud. In fact, they'll even use that term. They'll actually say things like, I'm just thinking aloud. So if you've had a hard, stressful day, there could be nothing better than sitting down and having a drink with someone, or maybe giving them a phone call or whatever, because that's the sort of thing that would energize an extrovert. Now, if you have completed the survey, you just have to have a look at your OWL and your LAM score. So whatever you scored for OWL and whatever you scored for LAM, if you add those two scores up, you'll get a total score for introvert. And if you add up your bull and your peacock score, you'll get a total score for extrovert. And then you can see, according to this profile, whether you're more introvert or extrovert. Now, if you say, well, my scores are very even, it's probably likely that sometimes you'll be the life of the party and other times you'll be a very private person. And that's how your scores are explained, because clearly you are pretty even between the two. But if you're predominantly introvert or predominantly extrovert, then it's likely that the behaviour of going within, if you're an introvert, or going outside as an extrovert, is likely to prevail. Okay, so that's the first interesting part of the profile, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But I think there's a lot of myths. You know, people say, oh, look, you have to be an extrovert to be a leader. Well, that's nonsense. 4 out of 10 CEOs in Australia are actually labelled introvert. Some people say that extroverts love people, introverts don't. This is nonsense. I'm an introvert, for example, and I really love people. In fact, it's my whole livelihood and business is working with and through other people. So it's not necessarily the case. And, you know, so we do put all sorts of labels on people and so forth, and a lot of it is incorrect, and I'd argue that you should think about that as well. Now, we're going to put up another dimension and have a look at it. And over here on the right-hand side, we'll have two headings. And as you can see there, we've got task focus and people focus. So let me just give you an opportunity to get your scores for this if you've completed your survey. If you add up your OWL and your bull score, it will give you a task score. If you add up your lamb and your peacock score, it'll give you a people score. And so what are task and people? Well, people who are task-oriented are people who, the most important thing for them, above all else, is getting the job done. In fact, even if we have to cut a few corners or annoy a few people along the way, as long as we get the thing done. Okay? So if you've got significantly higher score on that one than you have on the lamb and the peacock score, then you would probably know what I'm talking about. Now, if you add up your lamb and your peacock score, that will give you your people orientation. People orientation means that these people enjoy the working environment with people first and foremost. So it's important that the lamb and the peacock actually enjoy the people that they're working with as the number one prerequisite before we get things done. All right? So whereas the bulls and the owls, that's a secondary consideration. The task is the primary consideration. The secondary consideration is the people. Whereas the lambs and the peacocks, the primary consideration is who I'm working with, and the secondary consideration is getting the task done. So what that does now is it creates 4 personality types. And if you've completed the survey, and of course if you haven't, you just can finish it after this, and you'll get a recording of this, and you'll also get the slides, so you can actually go through it yourself and understand yourself more effectively that way. So that's the model, and as I said, there are a lot of those models out there, and this is one I've simply adapted using animals because it's easy to understand. So what I want to do now is actually look at the 4 personality types. And just because you're not one of those doesn't mean that you don't interact with that type. So whilst you mightn't be this, you probably know people that will exhibit the traits of that personality. So we'll start with the peacock first, only because it's the first column on the survey results. So who are the peacocks? What are their characteristics? So let's go through and have a look. The primary motivation of the peacock is being popular, and I don't necessarily mean that they're always popular. I just simply mean that they have a sort of a yearning to be popular. And it's important for them to be well liked and well considered. So that's their primary motivation. Their characteristics, and you've got more of these, of course, in your survey, but the characteristics are very much, they're extroverts, so they're outgoing, as I said before. They're talkers, and sometimes they can be accused of doing a little bit too much talking, and they're optimists. So in their mind, the glass is half full, not half empty. And so for optimists, they can always see the bright side, or they see the silver lining of the cloud, as they say. Their strengths as a personality is that they are quite appealing. In fact, interesting enough, the peacocks can probably get away with more than any other personality type because they're engaging and fun to be around. So people kind of just have a smile on their face, say, oh, that's so-and-so. You know, that's just the way they are. They're usually quite creative and colourful. They're full of energy and enthusiasm, and they're quite inspiring. So I'm sure you have come across those people in local government, and it'll be sort of very obvious when you have, because you won't miss them. They've usually got a loud laugh, loud voice. You know they're in the room because they're very outgoing, colourful characters. So who's some famous people? Well, I've just picked a couple of people here, and I've tried to keep the gender balance all the way through here. So Paris Hilton will clearly must be a peacock. A few years ago, you might recall, it was quite a few years ago now, I think she got sent to prison for tax evasion or something or other. It wasn't, she didn't murder anyone, but it was anyway, she got sent to jail. But my thinking about that is that I'd be thinking to myself, well, you know what? If I got sent to jail, I wouldn't be making it a publicity stunt. But she actually did make it a publicity stunt. She wanted everyone to know about that. So the typical Hollywood movie star will actually get depressed when they're not writing things about them in the columns, and they're not talking about them in the gossip magazines. They don't care whether the information's accurate as much as whether or not I'm being noticed. And of course, those of you who have gone to see, or at least seen on television, Billy Connolly, the Scottish comedian, who's an absolutely hilarious man, who really will, once, if you've ever seen an interview with him, he will just talk from woe to go, and the poor old interviewer won't get a word in, but it doesn't really matter because it's all entertaining. So there's some examples of exaggerated famous people. their motto is any publicity is good publicity, which is a kind of the Mae West saying. So the peacocks, and we'll talk about how we deal with them a little bit later. So the bulls, let's have a look at the bulls and try and understand their personality a little bit more effectively, and you might fall into this category yourself. So their primary motivation is being powerful. They're not always powerful, but they enjoy being in control. And in fact, it's very important for them to be in control. So they'll do everything they can to try to be in control. They are like the peacocks, extroverts, so they're quite outgoing. They're doers in the sense that they, usually have a lot of balls in the air at once. And, they're often doing too many things and not being able to fit everything in. They're optimists just like the peacocks, and the glass is half full, not half empty for the bull. They have a very much a can-do type attitude, very goal-focused, wanting to achieve and strive to achieve success. Their great strengths are that they're born leaders. Now, be careful with this. Born leader does not mean that they are good at leaders. It means that of the four personalities, the bulls are the most comfortable in a leadership role because, of course, it's a control position. So therefore, they will be quite comfortable leading others. Whether they do it well or not is a whole other question. They're very focused on achieving outcomes, and they get bored with detail very easily. So they will, you give them a bottom line. In fact, they'll use that term a lot. They'll say things like, the bottom line is. So they just respond very well to a clear picture of what the future might hold, and then they'll launch themselves towards that objective. And they move very quickly into action. So very rarely would a bull procrastinate. In fact, procrastination annoys the living daylights out of a bull. So who are some famous personalities that fit that mould? Well, two people that I can think of off the top of my head at least is Madonna, who basically is still going and pumping out records when she could well have been retired, very comfortably retired at that. She's controlled her career from start to finish. She is very short, sharp, to the point. If you've ever seen her interviewed, she's not much into small talk. She'll get straight down to business and give short, succinct answers. And of course, we've just had the US presidential elections, and Hillary Clinton would clearly fall into this mould as well. Very bottom line, can be accused of being bossy, wants things done her way, wants it done right now, and so you can recognise those traits. So their motto really is, I'm in control and I'm willing to lead. So that's interesting. So just got a question here. Actually, is this Trump as well? Actually, that's an interesting question you ask. Where would you put the current US President Donald Trump? Well, let's go through a process of elimination. Well, he's certainly, because we haven't looked at these yet, he's certainly not a lamb, and he's certainly not a owl. Right, so they've been eliminated immediately because owls are into detail, and he's not a detailed person by the look of it. So clearly he must be a bull or a peacock. And I would suggest that probably because he enjoys the limelight to the extent that he does, he's more likely to be a peacock than a bull, even though occasionally he will act like a bull. I would suggest to you that he's probably a peacock, a classic peacock, and wants to be noticed. A booming, loud voice, dominates the conversations and so forth. So I'm in control and I'm willing to lead is the motto of the bull. So thanks for that contribution, Beck. Moving on, the owl. So those of you who fall into this category, let's have a look. And you would be dealing with people, and I know local government is not short of the odd owl. I probably shouldn't use the word odd owl, but they can sometimes come across that way. All right, so their personality, their motivation is they are perfectionists. Now, I don't mean they're perfect and they wish they were, but they're not. But they're always striving to get the perfect answer, always striving to get the perfect information. They often will take a long time to get things done because they're trying to do it absolutely perfectly. So we all know people like that, and they do. They're attracted to detail in particular. So their characteristics are that they're introverts. So they're very good at analysing risk. So they'll look at something from a risk adverse point of view and be able to give an analysis very quickly about the likely risks that could occur. And of course that can come across as quite negative to other people who don't quite understand the value of that. They are thinkers. In fact, they will spend too much time thinking. Let me give you an example. I bumped into someone the other day who was a classic owl, and we were sitting down. We're going to have a one-on-one coaching session, and I said, how are you going? And she said to me, she said, oh, I don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? She said, well, a funny thing happened to me this morning. I said, what happened? And she said, well, Fred, who I call him Fred, who I bumped into Fred in the hallway on the way to my office, and he said hello to me. And I said, right, what's the problem with that? And she said, well, it's funny because Fred has never, ever, ever said hello to me in the morning. And there's something going on. So the owls will tend to overthink things. Maybe Fred was just in a good mood that morning. Who knows? Then anyway, at any rate, they're pessimists. So the glass is half empty rather than half full. Okay, so their strengths are that they like schedules and they're very good at schedules, and they expect people to keep to those schedules. They usually have very high standards of themselves and of other people. So they're quite fussy. They have a very high standard, but I think the thing that's often forgotten about the owl is that they have a very high set of standards for themselves. And this is important because I think sometimes people just assume that they're just being fussy and picking on other people. They're very tough on themselves. There's two people that I could name, one historic figure and one current figure, who would fit the bill. Roger Federer, the great tennis player, is an absolute perfectionist. And I think if you go in and you just type in Roger Federer in YouTube, you'll find this very interesting video of Federer who asks people to put a ball on the top of somebody's head, and so accurate is he can knock that ball off from about 20 paces away, which of course is a hugely terrifying experience for the person that's got the ball on the top of their head. But such a perfectionist is he that he's able to be that accurate in terms of his own serve, which is quite incredible. So he is a perfectionist. And Leonardo da Vinci, the great Italian entrepreneur and artist, has to fit the bill. In fact, you can see down the bottom in the right-hand corner, there are some sketches of the human body there. And those sketches, which you might have remembered from your school days, they were done, interestingly enough, when Leonardo da Vinci went into a graveyard. I'm sure they didn't have a council permit in those days. Went into a graveyard and he dug up a body or two from the graveyard and dissected it. And what he was attempting to do, of course, was to get the perfect depiction of how the muscular system worked. So in other words, such a perfectionist was he that he'd go to that great length to get the human body form absolutely right. So you get the idea of how the owl likes to operate. So their motto in life is that how can I paint this perfect picture? All right, the last one, and then what I'm going to do when I finish up this last one, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you deal with these four personalities, because essentially that's really what it's all about, isn't it? Is how we get the best out of each of them. So the lamb, the final one we'll look at, and so if you had the highest score in the lamb, some of these things will resonate with you. So their primary motivation is being peaceful. Again, they're not always peaceful, but they seek out peaceful situations. So they don't like to rock the boat. They're usually conflict avoiders, and there is a strong tendency for them to be the peacemaker in the team. And they will do everything they can to be the peacemaker. Their characteristics are essentially, like the owl, are introvert. They are watchers rather than thinkers, so they will tend to watch other people very carefully, and normally they won't volunteer for things up front. They'll wait for other people to dip their toe in the water before they decide to jump in. So they will tend to watch. So in a meeting, what will normally happen is that they'll wait for everybody else to make their contribution, and then they'll jump in and make their contribution. It'd be rare for them to jump in first. So they tend to be glass half empty rather than half full personalities. So they're very competent at they're competent and steady. So if you give a lamb a job to do, and you're clear and patient with them, you'll get a great job. They'll do a good job. They're usually pleasant to work with and very agreeable, and people enjoy working with them because they're non-threatening, and they generally don't rock the boat. And we all like to work with people like that, I think, most of the time. And they're very good at mediating problems, so they can see problems, and what they will tend to do is not take sides, but rather to try to find some middle ground, which is very, very important for them. And there are two personalities that come to mind very much around this particular personality type. Keanu Reeves, the famous actor, Hollywood actor, is very much inclined towards this personality type. He's not interested in the publicity. In fact, it repels him. He lives in a modest home. Obviously, he's worth a lot of money, but he doesn't have fussy tastes. He's very laid back, a pleasure to work with, and doesn't necessarily fit the stereotype Hollywood mold that we've talked about with the Peacock. Kirsten Stewart is another actor who very much fits the mold of this personality type, shies away from the publicity, just does what she needs to do in order to fulfill her agreement around publicity around the movies. That's not the enjoyable part, of course, but it's to be playing the role that she may play and does particularly well at. So that's the personality type, and their primary motivation in life is that they believe that peace is the overriding objective. So they'll do all they possibly can to ensure that peace prevails. They will mediate between conflicting forces and try to find some middle ground. So there you are. So where do you fit in? And if you haven't had a chance to complete complete the personality profile, I strongly suggest you do, because by completing that, you'll get a very good handle on who you are and how you like to, as I say, carry around that personality or persona, which comes from that Greek word mask, and how you actually utilize that in your day-to-day activity. Okay, I won't go through this exercise. I'll just keep moving on. Now, I do want to finish up by talking about how you might deal with each of these personalities, because we've all had personality clashes, and we all understand that not everyone sees the world the way we do. But unfortunately, we don't often think to perhaps tailor our comments or make our suggestions or to relate to people according to how they want to be related to. There's a tendency for us to pretty much relate to other people according to our own primary motivations. So if you think about the peacock, for example, they recognise, I think it's important to recognise their challenge in following through. They, will often promise something and drop the ball because they forgot about it or something better came up. You need to keep reminding them of the commitments that they've made when you're leading them. So they don't mind that. In fact, in some respects, they really appreciate that because they just have trouble thinking in that structured way, the way the owl would probably think. They realise that sometimes they will talk without thinking. So it's not that they're out to upset anyone, but putting their foot in their mouth is not an unusual characteristic of this personality. And it's because they don't think enough or often about something, and they'll just go off and say what they want to say and then realise, of course, that they have perhaps offended the person next to them. They don't stew over that for very long, which is an admirable quality, but nevertheless, putting their foot in their mouth is a trait that is not is quite commonplace. And for those of you who are a little bit more considered, like the owl and the peacock, the owl and the lamb, might be thinking, well, why don't they think more about it beforehand? It's just not their style. They actually think aloud. They think on their feet, and that's how they think. So everything that's thought about in your head, they'll actually do in another way. So realise that they thrive on variety and they thrive on flexibility, and they usually have a short attention span. They usually like to be working on a variety of projects and things at the one time. And so sometimes they mightn't get them done either. So working on one thing methodically as a perfectionist is not going to be the way the peacock will think. So what does that mean from a leader's point of view? Well, it just means that you, wherever possible, need to give them some variety in their work, and just recognise that sometimes they'll say things that they may not necessarily believe because, that's the first thing that comes out of their mouth at the time. Don't expect them to remember appointments and be on time. So it's very important that you send them date claimers. It's very important that you remind them of various commitments and meetings. They just very much live in the moment, and they're not really all that prone to be sitting down planning things out in minute detail. It's just not their way. So don't get too upset with it, just the personality type. But if you give them reminders, obviously they'll adhere to that because they don't want to actually annoy you, but sometimes they forget. Be prepared to hear their stories. Now, I think that what that means is that they'll always have a story for you. They'll always have a joke, and I think you've just got to sometimes entertain that story or that joke as a prelude to getting them to do what perhaps they need to do. So they like to talk, they like to engage, and that includes you as their leader. Now, the bull. How do we deal with the bull personality? So what do we need to do? Well, just recognise for a start that they're very comfortable leading. So they will often lead. They'll gravitate to leadership positions, and if they feel there's a vacuum in leadership, they'll fill it. So it's not unusual, of course, for a bull to jump in and take over if no one else is saying anything in a meeting, or for a bull to take on a project and achieve it. And it really, it's often misunderstood. The people often think, well, isn't the bull being unreasonable here by jumping in? In fact, they're being quite pragmatic, and they're really saying, well, if you're not going to jump in and do it, I'm going to do it. So they're not trying to take over for the sake of it. They're really filling a void in the leadership area. So, which brings us to a couple of things that are critically important. It is important, if you're dealing with a powerful bull, to insist on two-way communication. It is quite acceptable and appropriate for you to be quite assertive with the bull. What I mean by that is that you should insist on two-way communication. So if, for example, the bull interrupts you, I think it's important for you to say, now just a moment, I've given you the opportunity to say what you want to say. Now let me say what I want to say. Now they will actually admire that because they see a mirror image of themselves in being quite assertive. So often what happens is people will do the opposite. They'll actually let the bull walk all over the top of them. And that's not clever, because what will happen is they will walk all over the top of you if you're not. And what will happen is that you will resent that. But if you stand up to the bull, you'll get a much better result. So there's something to think about when you're dealing with those people in your local government organisation that are a little bit forthright and bullish in their behaviour. Recognise that they don't mean to hurt. They just actually aren't all that sentimental. They don't walk around with their heart on their sleeve. They're not all that interested in small talk. So chit-chat and all that sort of stuff isn't really something that they value very highly at all. So just don't go there. It's just not worth it. But also understand it doesn't mean they're actually out to hurt you. They're just being so task-focused, just want to get on with the job at hand and get it done. But they're not actually out to try and make your life misery. That's not, in fact, it's the opposite. Be firm and to the point and let them know where you stand is critically important. And I often think that boundary managing is very important with this personality. So let them know where their responsibility starts and finishes. And you probably need to remind them several times of that, but don't be concerned. They actually need that, and they will appreciate it because they will see, as I said before, a mirror image of themselves. And of course they appreciate that. And those of you who happen to have this personality trait, I'm sure will understand exactly what I'm talking about. And realise that they're not, outward displays of compassion, are not their thing. So they will not necessarily, as I say, open up about their feelings, because if they did that, it would be perhaps make them vulnerable and be seen to be weak, and they certainly don't want to be that. So, as I said, their motivation is being powerful. Now, the owl is one of the most interesting of the four personalities, very hard to read and can be very difficult to deal with if you don't understand how that all works. Of the four personalities, the most sensitive personality type. What I mean by that is that because they're deep thinkers, they will often brood and think through the comments that have been made to a point where they will blow it up out of all proportions. And what they will often do as a result of that is sulk. They can sulk for days, weeks, even months, believe it or not. So if you find someone who's sort of very good at sulking, it's probably likely that they're an owl in their personality predisposition. So realise that also that, so in other words, I guess the key learning point for you as a leader is just be careful how you phrase things, because it's likely that they will spend a lot of time analysing what you've said. So you might as well do a bit of analysis on what you're going to say to them first, so that you're not caught in a difficult position. Realise that they're programmed with a mindset that likes to assess risk. So they'll often talk about risks and so forth. Try to understand that actually they put a lot of thought into this. They're not just being negative for the sake of being negative. They probably do have a point, and it's probably worth entertaining that, because it's likely that there's something there that probably needs to be considered. So if you're putting a proposal together for something and the owl says, oh, look, I'm just worried that this won't work, and then, the point you should be making then is, tell me why. Tell me why. And normally what will happen is that the owl will have a good reason for it, because they've thought it through. Be prepared to answer their questions. They don't appreciate waffle, and they don't appreciate superficial answers. So if you ask a owl a question, they expect a full answer. So they do read the fine print. They do understand the legislation. They do know what's right and what's wrong. They actually are interested in all of that sort of thing. So if they ask you a question, then and you brush it off, it won't be appreciated by the owl. Try to keep to a good schedule. They are very orderly and systematic and scheduled. So they do appreciate a reasonable schedule. So going off on tangents, taking more time to complete a meeting than what was scheduled is probably not a good idea when it comes to the owl personality. Realise that your arguments and opinions need to be backed up with substance. So if you're ready to duel with an owl, just make sure you've got your facts straight. Because if you haven't got your facts straight, it's a problem. Okay, so get that right in your head. Okay, finally, before we finish up, what about the lamb? How do we deal with the lamb personality? Keep the questions coming in, folks, or comments, because I'm more than happy to take them as they come. This personality, realise that they need to be clear about the direction in which you're heading. The lamb is not a natural goal setter like the bull. So they need some clarity around where you're heading. And in fact, if they know where you're heading, they will respond very well to that. So you really need to give them some clarity and direction about what you're expecting. And by that, I don't mean micromanaging them. I just simply mean give them a sense of direction. They will appreciate that very much. Help them agree on targets. So it's perfectly valid for this personality to say to a person that exhibits these traits, can we agree that you'll get that report finished by the end of the week? And of course, they'll probably say yes. And because they don't want to disappoint you or create conflict, it's highly likely they'll get it done in the time frame, provided, of course, it's a reasonable time frame. So that's the way to manage the lamb. Recognise that they don't always look entirely enthusiastic about how they do things. They have an internal system of happiness. Their face isn't always radiating warmth and love, and it's not likely to be a gregarious, outgoing personality. That doesn't mean they're not engaged. So look a bit deeper than just their facial expressions to whether or not they might be engaged in a meeting. Realise that putting things off is their quiet form of control. So, you know, when you give a lamb a job to do and they don't want to do it, they're not going to tell you, I don't want to do it, because if they did that, it would create conflict. Whereas if you gave a job to a bull and you said, I want you to do this, they'd probably say, no, I've got this other thing I've got to do or whatever. So the lamb won't say that because they won't want to create conflict. So what they do is they put it in the too hard basket. And what you find is that you've been waiting days and weeks and months for something, and it gets very, very frustrating. But it's their way of basically silently taking control because they don't want to do what it is that you have suggested that they do. Look for mutual agreement or commitment. It's very important that you look for that, because if you don't find mutual commitment or mutual ground to work on, it's likely that it could create conflict, and that wouldn't be the thing that the lamb would appreciate. Okay, so they're the 4 personalities, folks, and what I want to do now is move on to probably the key point out of the presentation today, and it's a simple point but often misunderstood. Excuse me. The point is this. The golden rule we've all learnt. We've learnt the golden rule. The golden rule is simply this. Treat people how you want to be treated. That's the golden rule. And of course, it's a good rule and it's one that stood the test of time. I'm suggesting that there's another rule that is very important in terms of dealing with people, and that is the platinum rule. The platinum rule is treat people how they want to be treated. So in other words, try to treat the personality types according to their predisposition and their behaviour traits. If you do that, you'll get much better results. And you can imagine what your homework is, which I'm just going to finish up on right now. And the homework that I want you to attempt is this. I want you to try to approach people that you lead with an emphasis on their personality type. So I want you to have a bit of fun with this. And of course you can start straight right now, basically, as soon as you've got offline here. Go and have a talk to someone and try to, first of all, work out what personality type they are. And if that's easy to do, then try to treat them according to that personality type. Some of the traits that I've actually gone through in the broadcast today. By doing that, you will actually find that you'll get a great result, because you are resonating, you're on the same page as they are, which of course is exactly the right way. And what you'll actually find is that the eyes will light up. People will appreciate very much the fact that you are treating them the way they want to be treated. And funnily enough, you'll get great results. So folks, if there's any last questions, now would be the time to type them in, because I'll take one or two before we finish up at the bottom of the hour. While you're thinking about that, let me just simply say that we've got one more module to do in the LGAQ Lunch and Learn series, and that will be module 6, which is about facilitating effective meetings. And it's an important topic, because that topic is, I mean, if you think about it, if you're not running meetings, you will at some point in your career be doing that. And you'll be doing a lot of that if you're not already. And what you'll find is that if you don't learn how to run decent meetings, then you are not only wasting your time, but you're also, of course, wasting the time of the people who happen to be in the meetings with you. So it becomes a really important point. All right, doesn't look like we've got any questions. So if you've got any questions and you'd like to send them to me via email, please do so. I'm more than happy to accept those and respond to them. And I'm also always happy in feedback. So if you can give me some feedback, I'm more than happy with that as well. So thanks, folks. I hope you've got something very useful out of Module 5 today, understanding people and their personalities. And I hope that you can have some fun and apply this in your day-to-day work so that you're in a better position to lead others. So happy leading, and thank you and goodbye.